All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Safe for Government webinar. And my name is Charles Maddox. I'm a founder and principal of the i4 group, but also represent i4D Solutions, which is a contracting joint venture with the federal government. And want to give you all a brief, very brief overview of how Agile is being adopted in the federal government today and some of the tools that are available to any agency in the federal government or state and local to use Agile methodologies to successfully implement some Agile practices within the federal government. Just a little brief overview of i4D and to give you an idea of what our focus is. It is on primarily safe training and consulting. We have cybersecurity and cloud development capabilities. It's a joint venture between the i4 group and DKW Solutions. A big focus again on Agile practices, enabling government agencies to become more agile within their IT environments, their cloud development environments, et cetera. Top secret cleared facility and a lot of other capabilities that might be of interest for any government agency looking to become more agile. An 8A certified company as well, and a lot of past performance and experience with contracting with the federal government. But let's jump right into kind of the agenda for today in terms of agile and safe in the federal government. By the way, before we get started, please feel free to put anything in the chat, any questions. We're going to reserve about 15 minutes at the end of this session for Q&A and to answer any questions that came up. So again, feel free to chat your questions, and we won't take them real time, but we'll reserve some time at the end to address those questions. So first thing on the agenda is to talk about federal requirements and how they meet Agile development. That typically we think that the federal government is, it's like a big dinosaur, it moves slow, but how can it become more agile? So federal requirements meeting Agile development. Then we're gonna actually talk about some of the specific practices and kind of the mindset and the new approach on how the government can adopt an Agile methodology such as SAFE and to still have compliance and regulatory requirements being met along the way, all right? A big focus on that part of the discussion is on meeting compliance, meeting the regulatory requirements, and how is that done? And we're going to talk about the Lean QMS method on how that's accomplished. All right, so jumping right in here, the problems that we see within a lot of our big federal agencies with government IT and software development jobs and things of that nature, especially when you have a government agency contracting out with multiple vendors that come together to produce on a mission for a particular agency. What are those typical problems? And so we're showing some here on the screen that probably resonate, especially if those on the call and the webinar here have run a program before and have seen some of the challenges with managing multiple subcontractors. These are the typical challenges you face, right? Dependencies, especially when you got one vendor dependent on another, or the vendor is dependent on some information from the agency itself, and getting that information in a timely manner. And then that causes a delay, and then that snowballs, and these delays just keep piling up. And then we're ultimately to the very last posted on here, late delivery or late discovery in terms of problems and things that are needed to be solved. Complexity. How do we manage a complex project? Again, requiring multiple vendors, requiring multiple inputs, multiple discovery points in the process. These are definite challenges. How do we simplify that complexity and make it more manageable so that we can actually have some successes and stay on track and make progress as we want to. Little visibility, little transparency into the progress, right? Every vendor, every subcontractor on a big program is doing things their own way or managing things in their own particular environments, using different tools to track their work and actually report on how they're making progress. How do we create more transparency around that and have a more collective, unified approach on how we can manage our programs? Sometimes we have this mindset that, validating all the requirements up front, getting our designs in place, boom, we're off and running. That is the success factor. Passing that phase gate makes it all easy thereafter. Nope, that's not necessarily the agile mindset. It's not the agile mindset at all. We're going to get to that. But, committing to early designs and requirements too early on in the progress, and that kind of basically anchoring our trajectory of how we envision completing the solution in our program actually causes a lot of anti-patterns and dysfunction. And we want to think in a more iterative way and have a process that supports an iterative way, and a process that supports a replanning, a rethinking, a reevaluating of our approach, so we can continue in a more true to the end solution approach. Another typical result of multiple vendor contracts and working with a lot of different groups in a program is that there's never really a way to systematically improve across the entire group, right? So the program, each team is kind of doing that in their own right, but it's never a collective, a programmatic, a systematic way of improving across the entire mission for your agency. And how do you get better and better and improve these practices, root cause analysis, some of these areas in your program to continually improve. So this is kind of a list of, and there's many more. I'm sure that anybody listening to this webinar can testify that this is just maybe the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more in terms of problems that need to be addressed. And it's because of this just managing a complex mix of different contractors and a complex solution that we're trying to work on together is inherently causing a lot of problems in our environment. So, well, here meets SAFE, the Scaled Agile Framework. And I'm going to use my annotate here just so we can have a little fun. And because government. So one big input to this big framework, it looks maybe complex on the surface, but through some analysis and training on this, it actually can be very simplified in a few hours on how this actually can work in an actual environment. But this framework was actually created back in 2012, so it has a lot of history. 2011, pardon me, the official launch was in 2011. We started working with it in 2012, so like a year right after. So we've been working with this framework and helping clients for a long time now. So we see a lot of the iterations and the different versions of the framework as it's come to fruition today. And government has played a big part of how the framework has transcended into today's state and today's version. So it plays a big role, as you can see. It's right at the top there, a key input into how it's the most upstream input into your requirements, or however you envision a program working with this framework. But this whole framework here on scaledagileFramework.com, all of these things are clickable. So some of the things that we're sharing with you today, you can actually see for yourself and in more in-depth learnings. Again, scaledagileFramework.com. I asked one of my colleagues to put that into the chat, and you could see exactly that spelling of the URL that could take you right to this website. So again, all of these areas here on this call it the big picture, are clickable. Full white papers, downloads, a whole lot of templates, a whole lot of goodies on here are available for you to actually go in depth and find out more about the framework and how it can be applied in your environment. But this is what we're going to be talking about. It's basically creating I like to call it a mental model on how we organize our teams, our vendors, our artifacts, our approach and our mindset to large scale product delivery. And so it pretty much covers soup to nuts, anything that you can think about in terms of how you need to get a product built and shipped out the door to your customer. Everything from budgeting, everything from how you align different allocations to operational versus development capacities. It covers the whole thing, soup to nuts. So again, we're going to touch on this, a very small sliver of it today, and how it's applied and from a regulatory and compliance perspective in the government environments. But again, just for your own research and your own learnings, I would definitely advocate for you to go out and take a look and check out, more in depth on some of these artifacts and these constructs here in the SAFe framework. All right, so going on to the next slide. So just kind of wrap our minds around what we're going to be talking about here. So a lot of the agencies we see on the left hand side of this this slide here, a lot of requirements from the industry, FDA, there could be CMMI, DO 178, and a particular actual FAA requirement that I've worked with in the past on building software. How can an agile approach still be robust enough and have the grit and the technical constraints within it for us to feel comfortable that it's good enough to actually build our products and ship them off to the government, especially maybe in safety critical environments and the such and the like. So and I would even say that the agile constructs, if applied properly and done in the right way and following a framework and a template such as SAFe, can give you the guidelines to actually produce higher quality, higher safety, and a higher level of assurance that we are delivering the right product in your traditional approaches. So traditionally, the approaches, done right in some of our traditional methods, especially if you had good people managing the project, good project managers that just, made sure that they're covering the right things. And we had a process in place covering the right things. It was basically kind of a know-how thing. But the agile way of working actually kind of just forces your hand. You got to do it a certain way. You got to evaluate at the incremental stages. So it's definitely a more robust method to assure, and I say quality assurance, assure compliance, assure quality, and validation and verification along the way. And so, and that objective evidence can be seen at the far right that we can make sure that we're getting out the right product to our customers at the right time. So this just can kind of get your mind wrapped around, well, why is that the case? I'm making this claim about agile is a more robust, it gives you higher levels of assurance than your traditional ways of working. So if you can see kind of the waterfall approach or our traditional approach up top, we're validating various stages of the life cycle of the software. We use software as an example here, the software development life cycle. So validating stages does not necessarily mean you're actually validating working validated software. And I've been in this situation before, and that's why I became an advocate of agile development, is from my history working in the aerospace industry and trying to get things like FAA compliance pushed through. It's because when you validate a requirements phase or a design phase, that does not mean that you've actually achieved the safety critical software component that's necessary to deliver to your to the government or to your client that's the aircraft contractor that you're working with. So again, it's these small cycles of validating the working system that actually meet those requirements. And the sooner that you can get that level of validation and verification, the better. And that's why we see at the bottom, we have these small cycles of verification and validation happening. And that way we can kind of assure that stamp of approval, that little blue ribbon there means that, we're getting sign-offs at these various stages. We call it continuous compliance. Another good thing to look up on that Scaled Agile Framework website, continuous compliance, verifying we can achieve some of the end results early on in the development cycle versus waiting to the very end and finding out, wow, we got it all wrong. We have to actually do it all over again. Or we got a big rework cycle that's going to take months and months to get accomplished. I wish we would have known that 6 months ago. We would have put a fix in place and got that taken care of right away. So that kind of goes to our lean mindset approach. We always call this kind of agile and lean. Agile and lean go together. That's why SAFe is known as an agile and lean framework. So these two kind of work hand in hand to accomplish these goals that we're looking for. PDCA, if you see that on the slide here, plan, do, check, act. So it's something that if you've been in the industry for a while and you've had any exposure to lean, the Short cycle, or sometimes known as the Deming cycle, that's what we're talking about here. You plan a little bit, you implement, you do, you check, you validate, and then we act or adjust. And that's how we continually move through the process and make sure that, again, kind of this concept of continuous compliance is that's how we verify early on that we're on the right track and not going off track, which, by the way, reducing risk is your main objective as a leader. So leadership of a program, you're a mission leader in an agency. What is your primary responsibility when you're subcontracting out this work to a vendor or a collection of vendors? It is reducing risk of delivery, not delivering the right thing on time, and getting it on time and getting the right thing into production. And how do you manage risk along the way? So managing risk through these phase gates is not an ideal state, which you can see here, what we're talking about. On the left-hand side, the phase gate approach gives you this artificial trajectory that you are moving towards an end state because you're validating requirements, you're validating design documents, but you're not validating the system. You're not integrating and getting feedback, that way taking action through plan, do, check, act mindset to move forward in the right direction, which we can see here on the incremental delivery side on the right side of the picture here. So it's kind of, in a nutshell, is our mindset approach to how we should be building product and thinking about product on our large scale programs within the federal agencies. How do we take this more iterative way and taking this to heart, not just in terms of how we build the product, but how we contract with our contractors. So that goes into setting contracts in place with subcontractors and vendors that actually are expected to work in this way and produce results in this way, produce feedback in this way. All right. Again, point you to the Scaled Agile Framework website. There's an article and there's videos on agile contracting and how you can set up agile contracts that actually support this way of working, support how you would set up a statement of work and set up a contract with a vendor and a budgeting process that is incremental and aligned with this. And so that way, even from a contracting standpoint, we're able to meet some of these objectives. Okay, so switching gears onto now, how is the federal government actually supporting this way of working? So the Federal Acquisition Regulation, call it FAR for short, there is actually a tech FAR handbook out there on how to support these agile processes in our digital ways of working within the government. A lot of government solicitations out there now are requiring an agile method be applied to how we deliver on that particular IT work or software development initiative. And a lot of this came to fruition back in the 2 administrations ago, in the Obama administration. If you remember, there's a big healthcare.gov fiasco that, it was laid and, the requirements weren't met. I think that, site was blowing up and doing all types of crazy things. But, if anybody's worked on those traditional waterfallish projects, you recognize the pattern, right? When it's time to release and it's time to go live, that's when all the issues come to fruition. And that's when things hit the fan. And so learning from that, that's kind of how this new initiative, this tech FAR was given birth to. And that's why agile methods are highly recommended in the government space. You might need to do some more education within your particular agencies to present these approaches. But working with a lot of federal folks that work in these different agencies, particularly they're setting up centers of excellence in various like the Small Business Administration and the GSA organization that actually initiates a lot of these solicitations. They're looking to make this more and more of a standard and almost a mandate that we need to always look towards using agile methods when contracts are rolling out, because preventing those fiascos like the healthcare.gov website and making sure we can reduce risk. We don't have an endless pot of cash. I mean, I'm a taxpayer. I know that you probably are too. We don't want to spend our taxes on a lot of iterations of things that could have been found years ago and things just being delayed, delayed, and then boom, we don't even have funding anymore to actually continue with this initiative. So again, these type of things that, being more lean and being more being more focused on accomplishing these objectives in a timely manner, and being the hyper-focused nature that Lean and Agile applies to our development initiatives is always the way to go. All right, saves us money, it saves us time, it actually builds better products in the end. And so another thing too, to a lot of these ways to actually, like I mentioned about contracting in a modular way, that is also specified on how that can be done in this tech FAR. Again, there's contract guidance given on how to set up these contracts to subcontractors and vendors. And I've actually had the opportunity to work with some at the SBA that are actually drafting up some of these requirements on how you contract with vendors and what would be the agile way to do that. And so it's in place, it's in motion. And so those that are listening to this webinar, please feel free to reach out, and definitely have some resources that you can reach out to get more information on how this is being applied in the various agencies, and how you can set up contracting requirements and RFQs and RFPs that actually meet some of these goals here. So we're not going to jump into, so that's kind of the part of the discussion I wanted to have about just the overall approach, why Lean and Agile is, a good fit for today's government agencies, state and local, and how even there's being moves made in the actual contracting part of the government to actually make sure that these requirements are in place in RFQs and RFPs, and also to just the contracting approach and the budgeting approach for these contracts are even kind of falling in line as well. So these things are definitely in motion. So now I'm going to talk more about the execution. How do you actually run an agile program in the government? How do you actually, look at your mission that you're on, and how do you make sure that it's going to be achieved? If you're going to take these agile methods and apply them, how could you actually make it work? So I'm going to give you some high level understanding on how that's done using the SAFe constructs. So the primary SAFe construct that is used is what we call the value stream. The value stream is all the people, processes, tools, everything that you could think of. So when we're thinking about that in terms of getting our mission accomplished, it's all the vendors that we're working with. It's the agency requirements. It's the FARs. It's the different agencies that are providing different requirements. It's the actual systems that still exist that we need to modify and enhance and improve. So it's all those things together that constitute the value stream that needs to, we're touching all these different points in the process with the different vendors to actually accomplish some solution value. All right, so that's our construct. We got a big, traditionally it's a big program. So very similar to our traditional programs, but there's a clear difference here. We're working in a way to continually optimize and streamline value flow across all of these groups. And so how that actually happens is we have these different, these different silos, and you can imagine there's these different silos for different subcontractors doing different things in the process, different agencies, different groups within our agencies needing to contribute to the value stream and getting things done. And there's inherently a challenge working across all these different boundaries, right? Management challenge, political challenges. There's this contractor doesn't like, necessarily working with another contract group. And so how do we get everybody to play nice in the sandbox and work together? And so that's what we're given with this value stream construct. We're giving a way of working that basically consolidates all these value streams into what we call release trains. And SAFe, that's what it's known for, an agile release train. It's a collection of processes and constructs that allow multiple vendors, multiple groups, multiple teams to seamlessly work together and deliver value together in a most optimized way, and building solutions together and improving together, delivering capabilities and features together. All right. Also too, there's planning constructs within the framework that allow this collection of teams and vendors to work together to produce long-term roadmaps for solution deliverables. So, from a business planning perspective, in your agency, in your mission, you're having trouble sticking to a particular roadmap that we're implementing to, the SAFe constructs allow us to visualize long-term goals as well as the short-term goals that Agile is known for, right? But also to a long-term roadmap. I know that oftentimes that's not, the thing that we think about in terms of Agile delivery is we think Agile delivery, oh, it's just that 2-week and, that 2-week delivery cycle. And I'm in a program where I need to understand what I'm delivering next year. Well, the constructs allow that type of thinking from a portfolio and solution level and how you iterate along those long-term lines as well as the short-term deliverable lines. So you can plan out these milestones, these releases, these different versions and iterations of your solution that you'll be seeing off in the future. How do you manage that from an agency perspective? So typically in the SAFe constructs, there's always 3 ways of looking at delivery. There is the technical delivery aspects. Technically, what do we need to have in place from a platform perspective, from a development practice perspective, from a technical compliance, technical architectural perspective, and things of that like. And those things might be called out specifically in some of the FARs. You need to have a certain level of validation in place to make sure that it's acceptable, and you need to have some compliance checks along the way to make sure that that's happening. Then there's another aspect in the SAFe constructs on the business value perspective, from the end user functionality and feature perspective. What are we wanting to have in the system? What do the screens need to look like? What does the user experience need to be? What type of functionality and business rules do we need to have set up in our system for it to be, meet the functional requirements that we're asking about? And then the third aspect in the SAFe construct is the process perspective. What are the planning cadences that we're going to stick to? And what is the planning approach that we're going to have? What are the different artifact levels and in Agile, we don't call them requirements anymore. We call them features and user stories and tasks that need to be done. So how are we going to lay those things out? What are going to be the requirements on how we manage those on a day-to-day basis? What is our visual management going to look like in terms of what's sitting in the backlog, what's in development, what's in analysis, what's in progress and in UAT and QA and et cetera, and in verification and the validation step. So having a visual management system around that. So the third aspect in all of the SAFe constructs usually revolve around a process management perspective. And in Agile, in SAFe, we use Lean and Agile, a Lean and Agile approach. So some of the tools are Scrum, Kanban, XP, some of those Agile practices there. All right. So oftentimes in the SAFe approach, so this is from an agency's perspective, and we'll have business owners or product owners that set the direction for a particular vendor or subcontractor, and that vendor or subcontractor may then have its own Agile team implementing on a certain feature or initiative in that way. And that Agile team may have its own, typically it may have its own product owner and Scrum Master and development team, or sometimes the pattern might be that the product owner is on the agency side where the Scrum Master and the development team members are on the vendor side. There's been various patterns that we've seen work well, but those are some of the common patterns that you might see in some of these agency and vendor setup in that way. All right. From a budgeting perspective, so let's just jump to that. So when setting up one of those Agile contracts with a particular vendor, it kind of simplifies down to, we have a fixed cost per PI, right? You have a vendor, you're gonna issue them a purchase order for a particular, so many PIs worth of work. There's a certain number of features that are in the backlog that we have on the docket to get accomplished within a certain time frame. So again, might be certain features we're expecting at these various milestones, and if not, it rolls over to another PI, and there might be certain incentives to get certain features definition of done within a certain number of PIs and how that works. But essentially, that's kind of how, in a very simplified way, we can see how we're contracting out work to various vendors and various buckets of work to to actually get the mission accomplished with a fixed cost per PI approach across our program. So from meeting regulatory and compliance on this, we're going to go into this aspect now that, as mentioned in the SAFe framework, there are methods called there's methods basically baked in the Lean QMS approach that's been documented in the SAFe framework on how to meet some of these verification and validation requirements. Okay, so things like test code coverage, things like I've seen like in the FAA example, for example, you have environmental testing requirements. You have to meet certain industry standards in terms of testing, in terms of, we used to call it shake and bake. You got to shake the device for so long, and while it's running an operation, simulating you're in a flight, in a flight environment, right? Hot, cold, and you're meeting these type of test requirements. And so again, along the way, we're incrementally validating and being able to show that we're passing and meeting these requirements along the way versus having that saved up to the very end. So this is giving you an idea of how you might look at these regulatory and compliance requirements. I stated this up front that, does this meet our Agile manifesto, the mindset that we're trying to accomplish? Working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. We welcome changing requirements. It's not, requirements changing is not necessarily a bad thing. We say that for requirements change needs to happen. That's to the competitive advantage of the customer, right? There must be a reason why we need to change those requirements. It's not something that we should be, pushing back on so hard that it just makes life miserable to change requirements. No, we should have a process in place that's adaptable, that these changing requirements, it perfectly makes sense. That's how we set up our process. That's how we set up our ways of working to be agile and basically accept those changing requirements and put them in place very quickly. Because some of these requirements like safety, quality, those things are set in stone. We call those non-functional requirements. A lot of those things will not change, but a lot of times functional requirements will. The user likes this now because they've gotten feedback on something. We showed them a demo that now they actually see that the system working in this way might be a whole lot better system than before. So functional requirements often do change. Non-functionals, not so much. But this way, this having this process, this way to adapt is very important. And that's why we believe in it. And it's been so successful up to this point. So a good way of looking at the various levels of verification and validation. One of the guys I used to work with used to say, used to give me this analogy, and I always like to use it now, but I give it credit to him for saying it. He's like, Charles, if verification is if I give you the specs to build a hammer and you go into the lab and you build that hammer and you bring that hammer back out of the lab and you give me a demo on that hammer and we're reviewing this hammer and it's a 10-foot hammer with a big tree trunk of a log as the handle and this huge thing big as a car as the head of the hammer. We'll be looking at that hammer. Well, yeah, that's a hammer, but that's not the hammer that I asked for, right? So verification is, yeah, you build a hammer, but it's not the hammer that the customer necessarily asked for. So there's some user acceptance, validation of the system that has not been done yet. So validation is just that. It's actually validating that we have built the right hammer for the customer. So that level of validation, and you can see the gentleman there, looking at the solution there. Yeah, that is the right hammer that we have asked for. It meets the specs. It's been verified, to the details that meets the requirements of the hammer of a hammer. But it's not that big hammer was not the hammer we asked for. But now when we basically shrunk down that hammer to a usable size for the customer, it's been validated to be the right hammer. And then lastly, is this hammer actually suitable to actually operate in the actual environments that we've asked for? Maybe it's you're bringing it up into the International Space Station, or we've brought it, into a hot and humid environment where, maybe if it wasn't the right non-functional requirements in place at that point, the wood on the handle rots away, and it's only good for like 1 year. Or something of that nature. So the compliance requirements need to be met as well, and making sure that we actually make sure that we have those compliance checks in place as well. A lot of times compliance also comes down into probably the thing we hate a lot, but it's necessary, is the documentation. Documentation, oftentimes can be treated as a deliverable in and of itself, because, one of the things that we used to do in the aerospace environment, you need to basically have traceability reports, making sure all from what the customer is asking for, all the way down to the test cases that have passed, that there's traceability, that every single requirement is being met in the customer specification. So that level of traceability, having a traceability document is oftentimes a compliance requirement, especially for safety critical hardware and software systems. So again, I'll point you to, I'm not going to cover this too much in depth, but point you to the Lean QMS article on the Scaled Agile Framework site. Definitely give you some good understanding and ideas around the statutory regulations and how they can be met, as well as regulatory, customer, and just overall industry best practices are all kind of aligned together with that Lean QMS approach. So let's take a look at, in action, how some of these things get satisfied. As mentioned early on, and it's unfortunate we don't have an opportunity to go very in depth on the mechanics and the cadences of the agile and safe approach. But if you can think about it, agile, technically, you have these 2-week sprints. And then safe adds on a larger cadence, which is called the program increment cadence, which can be 8 to 12 weeks worth of work. Okay. And we're looking at that big picture, thinking about it from a mission or program perspective. I'm in an agency, I'm running this program. I have this 12-week increment, 10-week increment, in which I have a planning process and an alignment process that can align multiple vendors and subcontractors to a common mission. And so with that, we set objectives and milestones in place at a big planning event called PI planning at the beginning of the program increment. And we plan out all the objectives for all the different subcontractors and vendors and whoever's a part of our mission for that time period, for that 10-week period. At the end of that 10-week period, we evaluate, you can see there at the next PI or program increment, we evaluate compliance, quality, manufacturability, usability, all the things that we're looking for. That's just a small subset, obviously, but we could be looking at functional requirements. You can see that's all started based off of a system demo. So we're demonstrating, firsthand, visually, whether it be on in a remote setting or in person, at an actual in-person event, we're actually demonstrating that we're meeting these actual requirements that we're shooting for in terms of the objectives of our program. It's one of the key agile characteristics is that we don't evaluate progress based on, checklist or phase gates. We evaluate progress on visual demonstration of the working system. I like to say that's like, Missouri. It's the show me state. Agile is like Missouri. You got to show me what you got. You can't just talk about it or show me a checklist or a PowerPoint deck about how you're making progress on your program or your mission. You have to show the system in motion. So also too, at that point, at that PI milestone point, we actually get an opportunity for customer feedback, vendor feedback, stakeholder feedback, leadership feedback. It's another alignment point in the process in which we can actually get feedback on some of these regulatory and these critical requirements that we need to make sure we're on track to meeting. All right, so this is validating our learning. We always say that in an agile environment, you're continuously learning what your customer wants up until the very point where technically you're done with the program. You've deployed the solution, and even at that point, you're still learning about what the customer likes and dislikes about the solution to go back into the next iteration of enhancements and improvements upon the solution. But we're always in a learning mode, especially when we're in the beginning stages of any program and deploying and building and deploying and building and deploying up until maybe a first release. We're constantly learning. So validating those learnings every PI is very critical to making sure you're reducing risk on not hitting your milestones and goals for your particular program. You could also see too at the very end, the improvement stories. Another key construct within the SAFe framework is we don't just call it relentless improving. We don't just call it continuous improvement. I gave you the answer before the end there, but we call it relentless improving. It's not an option. Part of the constructs is set up so that we have these root cause analysis sessions at every PI milestone to make sure we're addressing the root causes of why we're not making the right progress, why we're not potentially building the right things, why we're having a problem communicating from one vendor to the next. Let's put in some concrete action items and call them improvement stories to make sure someone's taking action on that in the next PI, so we don't face the same things that were that happened in the last PI. Remember doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you're going to get different results, especially if it's I think that's called the definition of insanity, if I'm not mistaken. We don't want to run insane programs. We want to run sane programs and actually achieve the right results. All right, so just to give you a little bit more crisp details on what we actually evaluate from a critical metric standpoint at each program increment is we get, in the weeds in terms of what the functionality is, what functionality has been completed up to that point. Quality metrics in terms of, productivity metrics, just to make sure we don't have any issues with, a particular vendor versus another. Are we actually staying on track? Is one vendor actually suffering from not having proper engagement with our product owner? One of our agencies that they should be working with and getting the requirements in a timely manner. So addressing all problems from soup to nuts, making sure that we have a closed loop process and making sure we're continually improving. All right. And then a couple last slides here. We're almost about to finish up here, just to give you a little bit more insight that the framework also has a very robust, and templates are provided to be able to construct the artifacts, the features, the epics, the epics, that's the big, sometimes we have these big initiatives that span multiple PIs. How do you document properly something that takes, 6 months up to a year? We have like a lean business case template to address that. We have a budgeting process to making sure that those get, there's a funding approach to how we understand the funding model around those and the different allocations that we might want to associate with compliance and regulatory. You could see, or you call them enablers, exploration, architectural, infrastructure, non-functional areas that we need to make sure that we have in place. A lot of times too, this could be in the documentation area, these enablers. We need these things in place in order to actually get these features across the finish line. So, and also too, with the features, there's templates around those. How do you create a business a benefit hypothesis statement? How do you write the right acceptance criteria for certain features? How do you break down features into user stories? How do you break down the big epics into vertically sliced features, right? The proper definition of some of these artifacts actually drives a lot of the agile ways of working across your missions and across your programs that you're running. So it's very critical, even upstream, that if you're properly, following the framework and you're using some of the tools and the templates in place, that just creating the right intent, the right definition of the problem allows for vendors to actually implement things in a more agile way. If you create a set of features for them in a very horizontal, componentized way, we're going to be building waterfall things all the way back over again. You're going to set yourselves up for building things in a way that you have to integrate everything at the end. And you're basically kind of replicating a waterfall process, but just using sprints in a framework to kind of manage a waterfall process. And we don't want that. So a lot of times it starts up front. How do we define our requirements in our agencies? How do we define the requirements call them the features, and get away from the requirements language. How do we define the features and the initiatives and the capabilities that we're looking for in our agencies in a way that drives agile development practices? So again, there's some templates and some methods around that are in the framework that help your agencies and your missions to adopt better practices around that. And then once we have those vertically sliced artifacts in place, our capabilities, features, and stories, then when we're validating at each milestone and increment, we have something of concrete nature to evaluate compliance on. We have something, we have a model, we have some working software that we can actually show we're meeting compliance on, that we're meeting the requirements on, that we're meeting some of the safety critical areas of the system that are important to us to make sure that we're moving the ball forward. So that is kind of it in a nutshell. And I'll stop at this slide just to take questions. I know we got 10 minutes left. And so I'll ask my colleague, Amanda, did anything come in the chat? Any questions or on any of the content that we're sharing? I'll look in here. Any questions? I'll kind of pause here for a moment to take any questions or comments or anything that came in the chat. Oh, I think here comes one. So question here came in NYC, the issue wasn't the agile, but the accounting. Has the federal government addressed capital versus expense in agile? So great question, Bill. So again, in the some of the COEs that are establishing some of the guardrails around lean budgeting and adopting the agile or adopting the safe approach to that, there's some patterns on how it's being addressed. And so again, it's right now, there's nothing across the board. You could just say all federal government has not even adopted, what I just showed here in the slide deck around just establishing a fixed cost per PI contracts with vendors. I mean, that's even, a little bit, that's kind of on the cutting edge. So no to your question across the board, but they are experimenting with it. And I just don't have a personal exposure to any program that's actually adopted the constructs that are being represented, but I know they're being pushed. And so I know that they're trying it out and it's still in kind of experimental stages. But it's still in the motion, and they're definitely trying to make headway in this area, because I know those guys. I actually trained several of those folks that are actually working in GSA, the COE, and they're trying to push some of these initiatives. But it's just very slow to adopt. These are new constructs, but I'd say definitely it looks bright. The future looks bright because they definitely see the challenges with using the old capital versus expense approach with a waterfall program, and that just doesn't match up with your agile ways of working, which is very iterative, and you're addressing capital and expense areas in a different way in that agile ways of working. Another follow-up question here: do you use hybrid to address that gap? Does hybrid work with SAFe? So it's just me. Because I'm not an agile purist, but one of the things that I am a lean agile purist. I would say that I never see an opportunity where you cannot apply a lean way of working. So you may not say agile, that we're not fully agile, but can you? And I understand there's some programs that you're calling it waterfall-ish, but maybe we can still lean out some of those constructs. I think there's never an opportunity, even on a waterfall program, where we can't lean up and find a way to accelerate value, get better alignment, apply some of the lean constructs. So to me, again, long story short, yeah, there's always going to be a hybrid type model, but I always say the hybrid is not just agile with waterfall, it's agile with trying to lean out your traditional approach, because we always want to improve upon collaboration, feedback, and all those things that we're trying to achieve. And lean can, using some of those lean ways of working can help us do that. But I would never just say that agile and use traditional waterfall ways of thinking is the way to go. But, agile and lean agile and leaning out your traditional ways of working, hybrid, yes, go for that one. All right. All right. Another question came through. Are there any success use cases that we could reference to drive home the variability of SAFe in government? So definitely, there's some definite good use cases. I would say the GSA is one use case, and actually those on this webinar, we'll send out some reference links to those examples. The GSA, SBA is another example. I know NASA is definitely, we're looking at a lot of those, going after a lot of those contracts actually, personally. So yeah, they requested to be agile. And if you think about it, a lot of the agencies that might have challenges with, which they all do, but challenges with not an unlimited budget, or a slim budget, they're going to want to be more agile, right? If you could do more with less, that's the whole agile mindset, right? That's why startup companies use agile. They don't have an endless budget. They want to validate assumptions and get value get value out there fast to know whether or not they're moving in the right way and try to have some quick successes. So it's funny. Those are the agencies that are tending to adopt agile more quickly than those that have very large budgets. I'd say I ain't gonna point any fingers, but you could probably just do your own research and find that out. From your perspective, what is a better way to adopt SAFe by government, federal, state, federal level? I don't think it's necessarily at a state or federal level in terms of which is a better way to adopt. But again, it kind of goes down to the point where what I was just talking about, when you're trying to get some type of technical, particularly technical is the technical area, software development, IT management, and you're working with limited budget and limited time. Those are the best cases for applying agile. Those are the best business cases to adopt an agile approach when you're trying to do things in that way. So, and that can happen at the state or federal levels. So I would say though, that just in my experience is that the federal has more exposure to a lot of these agile approaches, particularly SAFe. In my experience, in those that the state and local groups that we've been working with, they're not hip to SAFe quite yet. I mean, it's still kind of, it's something that's just not on their radar. But the federal agencies have definitely made, this kind of a, their SAFe is their go-to for running a program, an agile program in the agency. So that definitely is a better grounds for testing out some of these methods. All right. Anything else coming through? I think that's about it. All right. Well, this was definitely an awesome conversation, and definitely stay in touch for those on the webinar. We're going to be having more of these and definitely touch on some other topics, agile and government and various other agile topics. And, we even have some coming up on cybersecurity, DevSecOps, data analytics, and various other webinars and workshops. So definitely would love to have you join us again. And got one more question before we leave. One more question coming through. All right. You're going to get the drum roll, please. Okay. Government churns change slower than the corporate and private sector. How do you see that impacting the training and transformation plans to Agile? Traditionally, projects programs on the federal side were scoped out budget several years in advance. How can we impact that? So, great question. I mean, this just kind of goes to the root of change management. And I only got 1 minute left, so I want to make sure time is honored here. So this kind of goes to the root of change management. How do we drive change? So there are some, there needs to be what we call any agency trying to adopt these methods, you need to have what we call a guiding coalition or some champions of this change. And those champions of this change, you got to kind of set up this community of practice, like messaging that's kind of, it's just pulsating. It's just pulsating through the organization. And because change takes a long time, as you pointed out, you know, sometimes it's just not the right time. I mean, it is what it is. You know, a lot of our groups cannot change as fast as we like. You know, there's a lot of, you know, carryover and a lot of workforce that are kind of in their seats and they've been there for a while. They're looking to retire, and you know, we got to deal with what we're dealing with, right? So change is going to come incrementally. Maybe there's new programs and new projects, new startups, pilots that we can implement these new practices on to actually show and prove, like, hey, here's a clear example of how we just saved money and delivered value 3 times as fast as we did on that other program. So you got to be creative. You got to have those change agents along with you, and be creative and find ways to actually show that these things are working, get the information out there, get the learning out there, have workshops, have communities of practice, have training opportunities where you can actually have individuals trained on some of these methods. Because at the end of the day, what I've seen, I haven't seen anybody come out of any of the classes that we've taught to actually still be anchored in their old ways of thinking. They definitely see, oh yeah, this will work. It's just a matter of, is our leadership gonna allow this to happen? And so leadership allowing the change to happen and driving the change and guiding the change is kind of the crux of it. And how do we keep up the momentum and the pressure and things of that nature? So with that said, thank you guys again for joining the webinar. We're going to end it here. On that note, we will email all you guys. I mentioned the links to some of the success cases, which I think are very valuable for you guys. But other than that, again, thanks a lot for joining, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.